Throwaway because my husband knows my main account. I, 31F, have been married to my husband Dan, 39M, for 7 years. We have 2 beautiful boys, Tommy, 6, who has special needs and requires constant care, and Lucas, 4. Until 2 months ago, I thought we had a perfect marriage. Dan and I met through mutual friends at a charity event. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my work as a special education advocate. After 3 years of dating, we got married in a small ceremony. Things were great at first. When Tommy was born with developmental challenges, Dan stepped up. He changed his work schedule to accommodate therapy appointments, learned all the special care routines, and never complained about the extra expenses. When Lucas came along 2 years later, we felt complete as a family. Dan was the kind of father who attended every school event, coached Little League, and still made time for date nights. That perfect picture shattered 2 months ago. Tommy had a therapy session, and I needed to take photos to document his progress for his medical team. My phone was dead, so I borrowed Dan's. While trying to access the camera, I accidentally opened his work email. It was a genuine mistake as the icons were next to each other. What I saw made me freeze. There were dozens of inappropriate emails between Dan and his coworker Sarah, 34F. These weren't just friendly workplace messages, they were explicit and intimate. They discussed their special lunches at nearby hotels, exchanged inappropriate photos, and planned future meetups. Some messages even detailed physical encounters in Dan's office after hours. Sarah wasn't just any coworker, she was Dan's direct report, someone he had personally hired 6 months ago. I remembered all the times he had praised her at dinner, calling her a rising star and the best hire he'd ever made. He had even invited her and her husband Mark to our summer barbecue, where she had played with our children while carrying on this affair. The more I read, the sicker I felt. Sarah was married with 3 kids of her own. Her husband Mark had become friends with Dan, they played golf together twice a month and had even planned a couple's vacation for next spring. The level of deception was staggering. I couldn't confront Dan immediately. Tommy had a crucial assessment coming up at his special needs school. He's extremely sensitive to tension and change. Last time Dan and I had a minor argument about household chores, Tommy had anxiety attacks for days afterward. I couldn't risk disrupting his routine before such an important evaluation. So I started paying attention. Over the next few weeks, all the signs I had missed became glaringly obvious. Dan's late nights at the office always coincided with Sarah staying late too. His business lunches were mysteriously absent from his company calendar. He had started taking his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, something he had previously teased others for doing. He bought new clothes, joined a gym, and even started using cologne, something he hadn't done since our dating days. When I casually asked about these changes, he claimed he was trying to set a good example for a workplace health initiative. I created a fake email account and sent an anonymous message to Sarah's husband Mark, asking if he knew about the special lunches and hotel meetings. I felt terrible about potentially destroying another family, but Mark deserved to know. He never responded, and I later noticed he had marked the email as spam. The breaking point came last week. Dan had left his laptop open while showering, something about an urgent work presentation he needed to finish. A Teams notification popped up from Sarah, "Can't wait for Chicago next week." 3 whole days without having to sneak around. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Dan had told me the Chicago business trip was canceled due to budget cuts. He had even shown me an email from his boss about company-wide travel restrictions. Now I wondered if that email was fake too. That evening, after ensuring Tommy was settled in his routine and Lucas was asleep, I confronted Dan. His reaction confirmed everything. First came the shock, not at being caught, but at me seeing the messages. Then denial. Sarah was just a friend. I was misinterpreting things. Work relationships can seem inappropriate without context. When I mentioned specific details from the messages, he switched to anger. How dare I invade his privacy? Was I spying on him now? Did I not trust him after everything we'd been through with Tommy? He even suggested my anxiety about Tommy's condition was making me paranoid and that I should restart therapy. The gaslighting was infuriating. I had screenshots of everything, the emails, the team's messages, his location history showing extended stays at hotels during lunch meetings, even expense reports he had doctored to hide restaurant bills. I gave him an ultimatum: either he confess everything to HR and Mark, or I would. His response showed me who he really was. He laughed and said no one would believe me. He was a senior manager with an impeccable reputation. I was just a stressed-out mom who spent too much time dealing with a special needs child. Who would take my word over his? That's when something in me snapped. I had tried to be mature about this, to handle it privately and protect our children. But his arrogance, his complete dismissal of my feelings, and his willingness to use Tommy's condition against me, it was too much. While he slept, I logged into his work email. He never changed his password, it was still Tommy's birthdate, and forwarded every inappropriate email between him and Sarah to the entire office. Every department, every manager, HR, the CEO, everyone. I made sure to BCC Mark too. The fallout was nuclear. Dan is suspended pending an investigation. Sarah resigned immediately. Mark has moved out of their house and his lawyer has already contacted me for copies of the emails. Dan is staying at his brother's place, alternating between calling me to beg for forgiveness and leaving angry voicemails threatening legal action for destroying his career. I know what I did was extreme. I could have handled it privately or gone directly to HR. But after seeing his arrogance, knowing he thought he could use our son's condition to discredit me, I wanted everyone to see who he really was. My only real concern is Tommy. He keeps asking where Daddy is, and any disruption to his routine causes anxiety. But I couldn't let Dan keep deceiving everyone while painting me as an unstable, paranoid wife. Ida for exposing everything instead of handling it privately? Update 1: The past 2 weeks have been absolute chaos, and everything I discovered has made me question my entire marriage. The morning after I posted, Dan's brother James showed up unannounced at our house. He demanded to talk, saying he needed to tell me something important before things got worse. I was hesitant to let him in. James had always been Dan's biggest defender, and I expected him to try convincing me to take down the emails. But what he revealed left me stunned. Apparently, this wasn't Dan's first workplace affair. 3 years ago, when he suddenly switched companies claiming he wanted better growth opportunities, he had actually been forced to leave due to an affair with his assistant Jennifer. This happened right when Tommy was diagnosed with his condition, during the most challenging time of our lives. I remember that period vividly. We had just received Tommy's diagnosis, and I was overwhelmed with doctor appointments, therapy sessions, and learning everything I could about his condition. Dan had seemed supportive, taking on extra work hours to cover the medical bills. Now I know those extra hours were spent with Jennifer. James revealed he had helped cover everything up. Jennifer had threatened to expose the affair to both the company and me. She had evidence of Dan using company funds to buy her gifts and take her on fake business trips. James, who works in law, helped Dan negotiate a quiet resignation and found him his current job through some connections. He also paid Jennifer $50,000 from his own savings to keep quiet, making her sign an NDA. The timing made me physically sick. While I was spending sleepless nights researching therapies for Tommy, attending support groups, and trying to understand his future needs, my husband was having an affair and his brother was helping hide it. James claimed he did it to protect our family, especially Tommy, but I wonder if he just wanted to protect the family name. Things at Dan's current company got even messier. HR's investigation revealed a pattern of misconduct that went beyond the affair. Dan had given Sarah unauthorized bonuses totaling over $30,000 in 6 months. He had promoted her twice, bypassing more qualified candidates, including 2 who had filed complaints. The company is now auditing every decision he made in the past year. My email blast also exposed 3 other managers who had similar inappropriate relationships with subordinates. One was even Sarah's previous boss, suggesting she had a pattern of sleeping her way up the corporate ladder. The CEO has started a company-wide investigation into what they're calling a culture of misconduct. Dan's threats about legal action disappeared quickly. His lawyer apparently told him any lawsuit would require him to testify under oath about the affair and financial misconduct. Instead, he's trying a different approach, painting me as mentally unstable. He's telling everyone that the stress of caring for Tommy has affected my mental health, that I imagined the whole affair due to paranoid delusions. Some of our friends actually believe him. The Andersons, who we've known for 5 years, suggested I should get help before making such serious accusations. The Wilsons, whose daughter goes to school with Lucas, asked if I had considered how this would affect our children's future. Even our neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who used to bring casseroles when Tommy had rough weeks, said I should have handled things privately instead of vindictively destroying a good man's career. But I also received unexpected support. Mark, Sarah's husband, came to see me after reading the emails. He had suspected something was wrong for months but couldn't prove it. Sarah's behavior had changed. She was always on her phone, working late, and picking fights about trivial things. When he questioned her, she would use their children as emotional leverage, asking if he wanted to break up their family over his baseless jealousy. Mark shared his own screenshots of suspicious messages and location history. He had started documenting everything but felt guilty about doubting his wife. Sarah had been gaslighting him for months, making him feel paranoid and controlling. He thanked me repeatedly for exposing everything and asked for copies of all evidence for his divorce lawyer. The most surprising support came from an unexpected source. The CEO's wife, Eleanor, requested a private meeting with me. She shared her own story from 15 years ago. She had caught another executive having an affair with her then husband but stayed quiet to protect their children. She regretted that decision every day, especially after learning that the same executive had gone on to harass multiple employees over the years. Eleanor promised to ensure the company handled this properly, saying it was time to break the cycle of silence that protected men like Dan. Tommy is struggling with the changes, as I feared. He gets anxious when his routine is disrupted, and Dan's absence is a major disruption. His therapist says he is showing remarkable resilience, but I notice him stimming more frequently and having trouble sleeping. Lucas is too young to fully understand, but he asks for daddy every night before bed. I'm trying to maintain their routine as much as possible while dealing with everything else. James keeps calling, switching between apologizing for his part in the cover-up and begging me to be reasonable about the current situation. He offered to help negotiate a private settlement if I agree to retract my allegations. When I refused, he hinted that he had evidence of my own misconduct that could affect custody arrangements. I blocked his number after that. I'm documenting everything now, every call, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. I won't let them twist this situation around and paint me as the villain. Dan made his choices, multiple times, and now he has to face the consequences. Update 2: Just when I thought I had uncovered all of Dan's deceptions, I discovered something that made my blood boil. While gathering documents for the divorce lawyer, I found irregularities in our financial records. Specifically, there were unusual transfers from Tommy's Special Needs Trust Fund, money that my parents had set aside from their retirement savings to ensure Tommy would always have the care he needs. I traced months of transactions, and the pattern was clear. Dan had been making regular withdrawals, always under $5,000 to avoid triggering bank notifications. Over the past year, he had stolen nearly $50,000 from our special needs child's future. When I confronted him through our lawyers, his response was pathetic. He claimed he needed the money to keep up appearances with Sarah, to buy her expensive gifts and take her to high-end restaurants. He swore he was planning to replace it before anyone noticed. This led to another shocking revelation. My mother broke down and confessed that 2 years ago, she had caught Dan trying to access the trust fund. He had claimed he was checking the balance to plan Tommy's future therapy sessions. When my mother questioned why he needed access without my knowledge, he convinced her it was a one-time thing and swore he was just being thorough about Tommy's care plan. My mother hadn't told me because Dan made her feel guilty about doubting him. He reminded her how stressed I was dealing with Tommy's needs and said she would only add to my burden by raising suspicions. She's devastated now, blaming herself for not seeing through his manipulation. The company investigation concluded, and it was worse than anyone expected. Dan was fired for cause, not just for the affair but for a pattern of financial misconduct. He had been falsifying expense reports, claiming business dinners that were actually dates with Sarah. He had approved overtime pay for her when she wasn't even working. The company's audit revealed he had cost them over $100,000 in fraudulent expenses. Sarah's husband Mark is suing both Dan and the company. His lawyer argues that Dan created a hostile work environment by pursuing married employees, and the company was negligent in supervising him. 3 other managers were also terminated after the investigation exposed a culture of sexual harassment and financial misconduct. Dan's brother James finally showed his true nature. After his attempt to negotiate failed, he contacted my lawyer with a bizarre claim. He said I had known about Dan's previous affairs for years but had used the information to blackmail Dan for money and privileges. According to James, I had threatened to expose Dan multiple times to get him to spend more on Tommy's treatments. It's completely false. I had no idea about any affairs until now, but James claims to have emails proving it. The reality is that James helped Dan create fake emails, backdated to make it look like I was aware of the affairs. They're trying to paint me as an opportunist who used my child's condition to extort money. It's a desperate attempt to help Dan get a better divorce settlement and possibly custody. I've hired a criminal lawyer to deal with the trust fund theft. The lawyer says we have a strong case, the transfers are clearly documented, and Dan's admission about using the money for his affair is damning. She thinks he could face serious charges given that he stole from a special needs trust fund. But I'm hesitating about pressing charges. Not because I want to protect Dan, but because I'm worried about how a criminal trial would affect Tommy. He's already struggling with all the changes. His therapist noticed increased anxiety during sessions, and his teachers report he's having trouble focusing in class. The thought of dragging this out through a criminal case makes me sick. The whole situation has attracted unwanted attention at Tommy's school. Some parents are gossiping, suggesting I'm using Tommy's condition to gain sympathy in the divorce. The school principal called me in to discuss whether all this drama might be affecting Tommy's progress. I had to remind her that I wasn't the one who stole from a special needs child to fund an affair. I know I need to make a decision soon about pressing charges. Every day I wait, Dan has more time to hide assets or create more fake evidence. But every time I think about moving forward, I picture Tommy's face when he asks why Daddy isn't coming home, and I freeze. Update 3: The situation has finally reached its conclusion, though not in any way I could have predicted. Dan was arrested last week on multiple charges of embezzlement and fraud. It turns out the trust fund theft was just the tip of the iceberg. The company audit uncovered years of systematic financial fraud that went far beyond expense reports and unauthorized bonuses. Dan had set up fake vendor accounts to divert company funds. He used these accounts to maintain a luxury apartment where he met Sarah and, as we later discovered, other women before her. The total amount stolen from the company exceeded $300,000 over 3 years. He had also been claiming false tax deductions using Tommy's medical expenses, effectively stealing from both the trust fund and the government. Sarah came forward with a full confession after her divorce was finalized. Her statement to the investigators was eye-opening. The affair had started during her job interview. Dan had implied that her employment and advancement were contingent on their special relationship. She provided text messages, emails, and hotel receipts that proved Dan had been running this scheme with multiple employees over the years. The criminal investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Dan's brother James wasn't just helping cover up affairs, he had been actively participating in the financial fraud. As a lawyer, he had helped Dan create fake companies and documentation to hide the stolen money. When the arrests started, James disappeared. The FBI found his car abandoned at the Canadian border, but there's been no trace of him since. Most of our mutual friends who had defended Dan have now apologized to me. The Andersons, who had suggested I needed mental help, sent a lengthy email expressing their regret. The Wilsons, who worried about how this would affect the children, now bring meals every week to help out. Even Mrs. Peterson, our judgmental neighbor, admitted she had been wrong about Dan's character. Tommy's situation has actually improved. Without Dan's constant gaslighting about his needs being too expensive, I've been able to get him additional therapy and support services. His new occupational therapist noticed issues that had been overlooked before, and we're seeing real progress. Lucas has stopped asking about Daddy every night, though he still keeps Dan's picture by his bed. Mark and I have formed an unexpected friendship. Having both gone through similar betrayals, we understand each other's struggles. He's been incredibly helpful with Tommy's care since he works in special education. His insights have helped me find better resources for Tommy's development. To be clear, there's nothing romantic between us, we're just two parents helping each other heal and move forward. The divorce proceedings are moving quickly now that Dan is in custody. His attempts to claim partial custody were dismissed after the trust fund theft came to light. The judge was particularly harsh given that he had stolen from his own special needs child. I've been awarded full custody of both boys, with Dan limited to supervised visits once he's released, if he ever wants them. I started a support group for parents of special needs children who are going through divorce or dealing with financial abuse. The response has been overwhelming. So many parents have similar stories of partners using their child's condition as a weapon or stealing from medical funds. We meet weekly, share resources, and help each other navigate legal and emotional challenges. The company has implemented major changes following this scandal. They've established a victims fund for employees affected by similar misconduct and created new oversight procedures for expense accounts and promotions. The CEO's wife Eleanor is heading a committee to address workplace harassment and financial transparency. Dan is facing significant prison time. His lawyers have approached me about a plea deal, suggesting I write a letter requesting leniency in exchange for a larger divorce settlement. I declined. He didn't show mercy when he stole from his special needs son. I won't help him avoid consequences now. Some people still ask if I regret exposing everything so publicly. I don't. Sometimes shining a light on darkness is the only way to eliminate it, no matter how messy the process becomes. Tommy and Lucas deserve better than a life built on lies, and I'm finally able to give them that.